Hi, I'm Dr. D. Leitner, and welcome to the Doctor's Den, where I interview friends and former students to hear their stories, learn from their personal and professional growth, and hear about how they are engaging politics, strategy, and leadership in their everyday lives. So join us as we deep dive into the lives of everyday people and try to learn some important lessons along the way. Welcome to the Doctor's Den. Hi, welcome to the Doctor's Den. Today we are hosting Miriam Weiss, someone who I have known for almost 20 years. Miriam is a senior technical writer at Red Hat. She's been a technical writer for 11 years. She works for the OpenShift container platform solution, and she's a mom. She has 5 kids, ages 6 to 16. She's been writing fiction since she was 8. She loves singing, mixology, and playing Dungeons and Dragons. And as she describes it, she has hella ADHD. Miriam, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, David. Wow. 20 years? that can't be right.
20 years.
Almost 20 years. Jeez. Okay.
Well, let's start with that. We first met for a play when you tried out. 2004.
2005.
It was in 2005.
I mean, I met Shimmy 2004, and then Princess Bride was 2005.
Was it? Oh man. So I have 2 more years. Fine. We've been knowing each other for 18 years. That's almost 20 still.
Okay, that's almost. You said almost 20. You were right.
I said almost 20. Right. So we're good. Yeah. So we've known each other since 2005. Then when you tried out for the Princess Bride.
Yep.
That's a long time.
Yeah, that's a really long time.
Wow. Okay. So I guess to start out, how'd you get to the position that you're at? Like, what from 2005? What happened that got you where you are today?
I mean, that's a huge question. I think like so many things in my life.
You can take bits and pieces.
Yeah. A lot of people ask me how I got into technical writing to start off with, because it's like not the sort of career that you wake up one day when you're a little girl and go, hey, I want to be a technical writer when I grow up. No one says that ever. That's not a thing. So yeah, I studied English literature at Bar-Ilan University, where we met, and I love literature. I've always loved reading. I've always loved writing. I've always loved picking a story apart. And you know that standard question: what do you do with a degree in English? Well, not very much. So you know, I met my husband while. A little bit before I met you, and we both studied English, and we were living near the university, and then we had our first kid, second kid, third kid, and you know, you get to a point where you're raising a family and you have a tremendous amount of knowledge, but not anything useful in the workforce whatsoever. And you know, we got to the point where we really needed money. You know. Like every major life decision, not every major, but a lot of major life decisions, it comes down to we need more money. So my husband is more of he likes to build businesses. He was trying to build up a business at the time, and we realized that we needed one person with something really stable. So I had heard about technical writing from a friend. I'm pretty sure it was Rivka Pollack, another friend from our heydays at Bar-Ilan, and
shout out to Rivka.
And I said, okay, I'll like give this a shot. And there was a great course that's run by it's still ongoing, run by a company called On Target Communications here, and they do this like 3-week crash course for just the tools and the basics, and then they set you up with an internship position where you learn on the job for 3 to 4 months. And then they're also a placement company, and they help you get hired, which is really a dream situation for anyone who wants to go into a new field. Having someone who has your back, who's really invested in making sure you land a job. but I was horrified by having to make this decision. I was like, I'm a free spirit. This working a desk job is going to kill me. I'm going to be miserable for the rest of my days. It's going to eat my soul. Like I was like mourning this loss of freedom, of perceived freedom. And I was like, this is going to be terrible, but I was like, all right, suck it up. Let's go for it. And I remember starting this course and like within the first 3 days being like, this is not what I thought it was going to be at all. This sounds much more dynamic. This sounds actually decently creative. It's not just writing. There's so much more going on in a job. And I found out later on that's not everywhere. You know, every place has different requirements and things they're looking for from a writer.
So you just said something that's actually really interesting to me. You said that it's much more dynamic. Now, I have no idea what technical writing looks like. But to me, technical writing is writing black and white pamphlets that like instruction manuals, excuse me, and it is the driest, like jargoniest, or trying to take jargon and make it not jargon, but like everyday person can understand what they have to do, what buttons they have to push in order to make this whatever work right. And I think that a lot of people think that that's what technical writing is.
Yeah.
So could you give a more like a slightly broader picture of what this looks like?
So you're partly right. You know, at its core, technical writing is documenting how to use something. Mainly for high-tech companies. Now, everyone will be like, oh, so you guys write like the pamphlets that come with like your toaster. No. Someone does somewhere, I'm sure, but that's, you know, I don't think anyone's hiring a technical writer to do that. It is, you know, when a high-tech company produces new technology, whether that technology is in the cloud and something you're using as like an application, whether that technology is a platform that is used by other developers for whatever it may be, whether it is something more technical than that, APIs, etc. Don't ask me about APIs. I don't know a lot about APIs. It's not my like area. So like I threw out APIs and I was like, oh no, you shouldn't have said that word. It's fine. It's fine. And someone has to sit down and explain to this end user, this perceived end user, how to use this content. And that can range, you know, that can range anywhere from a product that is, at my last company, I worked on an application suite that was intended for workforce management, for managers to manage their employees' time schedules, etc. It had quality assurance elements in there. It had gamification for employees also, and like it was like a whole broad suite of applications. And so the end user, the person who's going to be using it, we had two. We had, you know, managers who would be using it at the manager level, and we had the agents. This was for call centers, etc., who would be using it. And then you have to figure out also, okay, well, who am I writing to? Agents in these call centers, we're talking about people who probably have a high school education, but also possibly not, maybe beyond that. You know, we have to make sure the level of writing is clear and understandable. We want to make sure that, you know, that product included a lot of UIs, an interface that you see on the computer. You know, so I was getting involved there at a design level with the designers to kind of include text and include strings, you know, of text in there that would be as clear as possible. And getting involved with like, you know, how are we going to make sure that this UI is as clear as possible so that we don't have to document as much, you know, as when I'm working on a product that is visible, that you can see, that has a UI, I would love it if I didn't have to write as much. You know, I want to be able to assume that the users are going to be able to figure it out from context. You can't always do that. There are going to be, so the areas that were more complex and complicated would get more.
Because you want the.
Yeah.
No, wait. So like the idea you're saying, it sounds really interesting. What you're saying is you're suggesting that you want the user interface, the UI, to sort of cut down on what you have to write so that people can learn intuitively or from the actual
Yep.
interface what they need to do, rather than having to read a instruction manual or get instructions in order to do that.
Which we get into, no one reads instruction manuals anymore. People want context sensitive help, you know? People want to be like, oh, I'm having problems with this specific thing right now. Sorry. What?
It's okay. It's okay. It's fine. I think that it's really interesting because what you're seem to be suggesting is that technical writing has this place in design that it can actually say, hey, wait a second, visual, can you make this something which I don't have to write about so that people can learn about? Like you are actually saying, I want to try and make it as easy for the end user. And sometimes the best way to do that is not to engage technical writing. It's rather to say to the designers, hey, wait a second, guys, this is something you can do visually and it will be better that way, right?
Yes, and I will say that there is actually a role called a UX writer. There are people out there who specialize specifically in writing for user design. It's more niche, and very often technical writers fill that gap as well. And it was actually something that I brought to my previous company and started doing there, because the technical writers were not involved in the design stage at my previous company as much until I started really pushing for it. Because it was bothering me to see this UI that could be so much better, that could be so much clearer, that was inconsistent at times, that, you know, we have the same process in two different places, but we're using different, you know, names for it for some reason instead of connecting them. Like it's all this, you know, connecting the dots stuff. So that's a really interesting thing to get involved in, and you have to have an excellent relationship with your UX designers to be able to do that. You have to have this open conversation because it's their design, they're in charge, this is their area. But when it comes to explaining it or figuring out the best words, the most precise way to explain something to a user, you know, that's my strength. But that's only one type of technical writing. You know, not everything has a user interface. You know, now at Red Hat, I work for a company that develops for developers. You know, it's a platform for development essentially. And so it was interesting when I left my last job. You know, I had a lot of different directions I could have gone. And one of them was, you know, do I want to do the same thing I've been doing? You know, I created the global standards for my last company for how to do UI review for the technical writers. I got to build our style guide. I flew to Utah with, you know, for the company at some point to meet with technical writers there. It was really cool. I got to do some really outstanding stuff that, by the way, tech writers don't usually get to do. So that was awesome. And that I could do more of that. Like I'm an expert in that field at this point. And then I was kind of like, all right, you know, I've climbed this mountain. It's been fun. It's been really cool. I kind of reached as far as I could go, unless I want to branch off and just go into a different, you know, I want to go into, you know, product management or something instead. But this is pretty much it. And then I was like, oh, there's this cool mountain like next door. Let's try climbing that one. So I went from this area that I knew a ton about into documenting very highly technical, more conceptual documentation for a very different audience. You know, I wasn't documenting anymore for an agent at a call center. You know, I'm now documenting for a developer at company XYZ who wants to use our platform to develop products for their own company, or anybody who wants to develop something, which is super cool. And it's much more technical, and it's stuff I don't understand. I didn't understand.
Okay, I have a question. Question goes like this. It seems to me like what you are saying is that a lot of your work is about understanding and really getting into the head of the end user or the consumer of whatever it is you're going to be writing about. And you have to do a lot to do that. Like, to be able to understand an end user and a consumer in well enough to be able to speak their language, to be able to really adapt whatever it is you're writing takes a great deal of effort and skill. How do you find yourself learning about your end users? What is it that you use? What tools do you use, or what skills are you using to do that? And Has Dungeons and Dragons or your theater skills or being a mom helped you out with like sort of understanding your end user in any way? I'm curious.
That's a fascinating question. I mean, once you added that last part onto it, that was like, ooh, because you know how like I know English. I'm really good at English. This is my forte. And growing up in a country that studies English as a foreign language, in high school, I'd have friends who'd be like, okay, but like, what is this past participle? Is this, and I'm like, I don't know. I just know how to speak English correctly. Like, I can't tell you the why of why I know how to do this. And so this question is kind of similar to that. Because I will say,
That's fair.
I think that this is, I will say that this is not necessarily all technical writers know how to do this. I think this is my personal forte as a writer is that, and then you added in like, and this Dungeons and Dragons and having kids and yes, it does actually inform that a lot. You know, I have always been a very creative and empathetic person. I'm fascinated by people. You know, like I said, I've been writing since I was little. I've been reading. I'm the breadth of human experience is fascinating to me and always has been. And you could see it in all of my interests. You know, I went into acting, I write, I like Dungeons and Dragons and creating characters and interacting and role playing with people. So I think that for me personally, being able to sit down with a product and understand who my end user is and who the audience is for this product, it's always been easy for me personally to kind of put myself in those shoes and say, okay, what is this user going to need to know? What are their pain points going to be? You know, sitting down and this is not Red Hat specific or any like this is just, if I sit down in front of a piece of documentation, and this has happened to me before, I've been thrown into a brand new project that I'm unfamiliar with, which by the way is the best. That's when you're new at a working on a project and you don't know anything about it. That's your purest kind of coming into something and being like, okay, I know nothing. So now I get to look at what is here already at the documentation, and I can go through this and be like, well, wait, if that's that way and this is this way, I'm missing. That's where you can spot the gaps really, really well as a dummy user. You know, I'll use I don't love that term because, you know, I don't want to call anyone a dummy or anything like that, but I've been a dummy user more than once, and it's an incredibly useful experience. So even going into, you know, a new project, like at Red Hat, for example, where it was not just a new product, a new company, it was also a new area of documentation that I never worked on before. It was highly technical, and I'm not a highly technical person. But when I sat down to look at the existing documentation for this product I was going to be working on, the specific part of it, I didn't know what they were saying, but I knew that a lot of how it was being said, and it was brand new. It had been written by developers. It hadn't even gone through tech writing yet. So I'm not like throwing anyone under the bus here or anything like that. But I knew looking at it that how it was being said was definitely not right. You know, there's a story being told in documentation. There's a story being told there of you can see the steps generally in at least in a big, in a macro way. And if that's missing and you're not clear how you get from point A to point B, then something's wrong, and that's where you have to start figuring it out. So it's kind of a whole bunch of things aggregated together. Yeah.
You just said that you use storytelling in your technical writing. How?
So again, it's storytelling. It's not storytelling. Like, it's not once there was, you know, a boy and he wanted to do this but it's yeah. Anything. When you have something, when you have documentation, there's a story. You're starting at a point where you don't know how to do this thing, and you end at a point where you do know how to do this thing. And the story is the process in between. And it has a beginning, it has a middle, and it has an end. It has the most important points within the story that you have to make sure that you don't miss, the points that are necessary for the story to continue, or you can't move on to the next part of it. There is a flow, and that is a story essentially. You there are points that you can't miss, and they have to happen in order chronologically. So there is a story to it, and how it's told is important.
That's really cool. All right, so I want to just take a slight turn from here. I know that some of the places you've worked have had different environments. Like you've had open workspaces, you've had office spaces, you've had your own like office, whatever. What is it like in working in the field in different, like these kind of different environments, and how have you experienced that? Because if I remember correctly, there was a point where you're like, this is driving me nuts. And I don't remember exactly what happened. So I would love to learn a little bit about that from you.
Okay. So that's like intrinsically linked to how I found out I had ADHD and how I got diagnosed, actually. So it's a funny story. I have worked in a wide variety of work environments. When I started out, I was working in an office space with like 3 other people. We all were facing like circular, so our screens were all facing outwards. Everyone passing by could see. It always stresses me out having anyone being able to look over my shoulder. I think that's everybody feels that way, but like it was like very stressful because you're always like, oh my God, I have to at any given moment like make sure that you can see that I'm working, And then we moved to another place, and I shared an office with one other person. That was like the golden age of documentation for me. Like those years where it was just me and another person in an office in our own space. Like that was amazing. Like it was quiet. It was, you could have one-on-one meetings. That was great. And then they moved all of us into an open space floor, and I was freaking out. I was losing it. I was really stressed about this. Again, because I feel deeply uncomfortable with people looking over my shoulder at any given moment. Like it raises my stress levels. I know I get my work done. I know I get it done well in a timely manner. I know I get a lot of work done. But there's always this like, and I'm not going to get into why I get stressed about this. It's deeply connected to my childhood, and we're not in a therapy session here, so we're not going to get into it. But this is like my personal stuff I deal with. And this is like a big stress factor for me.
Okay.
And so, yeah. So I was actually at the time, and here's a big shout out to therapy. I love therapy. I think it's important. Everybody should go. I'm super big on mental health, people. So just so you know, I was seeing a therapist at the time because my oldest son was approaching his bar mitzvah. And I was a wreck. I was so stressed out. Like I was so stressed out that I had started breaking out in like stress rashes on a regular basis. It was not good. Wow. And wow. I was like, like I was so overwhelmed. I don't think I'd ever been that overwhelmed in my life. And so I started seeing a therapist mainly to deal with stress, whatever. And I was still seeing her when we got this news that like that was handled. And we found out that we were going to be moving to open space. And I was like talking to her about it. I'm just like, and I'm really stressed out about it. I'm freaking out about it. I don't know what to do. And she looks at me and she's like, well, why don't you just get a letter from your doctor saying that you have ADHD? Because, that kind of environment is not conducive to you being able to work. And I looked at her and I'm like, but I don't have ADHD. And I swear it was like watching her life flash before her eyes. Like in that moment, she got this look of just, oh no, like that was... Like it's frozen in my brain. This look of, we have so many more issues than I thought we had. And I went home and I remember being like, it was such a weird thing for her to say to me. Like, why would she say that? And I started like doing every single possible online quiz, which is not an accurate way to diagnose anything. But I was like, let's start from here for ADHD. And they were all like, oh, honey, like every single one of them was like, oh, no. So I went back to her and I sat down and I'm like, so, okay, I think I might have ADHD. And she goes, we should take care of that. It's like, so that was like the beginning of the process. And yeah, like I went to get diagnosed with a specialist. and it's a 2-hour session, and 45 minutes into it, she's like, look, I have to ask you all the questions. Like, we have to finish it up, but there is no doubt in my mind that you have ADHD. And I was like going around to all my friends afterwards, being like, apparently I have ADHD. And they were like, oh, you didn't know? So this was a secret only to me. My entire life. I didn't know. I didn't know. Everybody else knew. I didn't know. They all just thought I was like on it. Yeah. So that's
hold on. I did not think that you were. I don't think most of us thought you were on it. I think most of us thought that you had chosen to enjoy, because a lot of people who have ADHD don't want to take medication. They don't want to take stuff because it dampens so much of the creativity, and it makes them feel down, and it does so many different things to them.
Okay, here's where we're going to get into. So here's where we're going to get into fights about this, because I have so much to say on that specific subject about dampening anything.
I'm not going to fight you. I'm not going to fight you. I'm going to tell you what I've heard from people.
Right. So I'm not going to fight, but this has become a huge passion about me, for me, educating people about exactly this. So wait, let me like finish. I'm going to ADHD here for a second. I'm going to finish the other thing, and we're going to go on to this thing. So that was like a whole process of beginning to learn, like, okay, how does this affect me? Why, like, places that I was having trouble with, how can I improve my own work skills and processes, which I was much bigger wreck at my job. I was good at it, but I was not organized, or like, and I started this whole learning process of, okay, what does this mean? How does this affect me? What does this mean for my brain? Finding those places where I struggle and recognizing them and why, and finding systems to work around it. And then we hit COVID and everything went to shit. So I hated working from home. I never liked doing it. I liked my space. I liked my environment. And suddenly I had to be at home all the time. And that was a disaster. I don't want to get too much into it, because it was not only the work from home that was a problem. It was my entire life fell apart. My husband worked in tourism, and that was like really difficult. And I was the only income. And like I said, we're a family of 7. It was really rough. And over time I developed, I've gotten used to working from home now. At this point, I work almost exclusively from home. Also because Shimi, my husband, has now also gone into technical writing, and they want him in the office 3 days a week. And it's really hard to manage with the kids and with everything if, we both have to be balancing. And luckily I work in an environment that is, even pre-COVID, had a policy. They were very open to people working remotely, even pre-COVID. They recognized that for some people that was just better and it was easier. And, I know that there was someone working in Ma'ale Adumim who would come into the office in Renana once a week before COVID, because how are you going to drive from Ma'ale Adumim to Renana every day? Like, that's crazy. And that's like always been their policy. So when it shifted into COVID and work from home, Red Hat was super on it. They were like, okay, we've got the infrastructure for this set up already. As it is, all of our teams are super international. They're all made up of people from all over the place. We were having remote meetings already. Like, this is nothing new. So that's really fascinating how they managed to get through that, as opposed to like a lot of other companies. And even now, like, they'd love for people to come back to the office, but there's no pressure. It's like, look, you want to work from home, work from home. You want to, like, it's a really great, I'm very lucky to have that freedom and to be able to choose that way. So I'm super grateful.
As long as you're being productive and doing the things you need to do, right? That's the
very
line.
Much.
As long as you're doing the things you need to do.
It's very much the line is, yeah. They're very task oriented. Like, I work for the Israeli offices, so it's much more, you have to clock your hours, but I'm learning now about business practices in other places in the world, like most of my team is in Ireland. It's different there. They don't clock hours. It's a universal, it's just the hours you have and you do them. And it's very interesting. But yeah, as long as you get through the work you need to do, and you do it well, and you're on top of it, and I appreciate that, because that's very much, I think it's more productive in general to approach things that way. But yeah, so on the subject of ADHD, unless you have something else you want to say.
No, ADHD is great. I want to hear your take on this, because I think it's very important.
So it's been fascinating learning. When I first got diagnosed, so funny story. The first one in my family to get diagnosed was actually Adir, my middle son, and we started him on meds, and they were okay, like whatever, same. This was what the doctor prescribed, and he's having trouble paying attention, so we have to help him pay attention. I got diagnosed, and it was so weird for me, because I was like, but I was never that kid in school who couldn't pay attention. I got great grades in high school. We're not going to talk about college, whatever. But in high school, I was like doing fantastically. And so I suddenly had this disconnect of, but this is what I thought this was all this time. Where was I wrong? And I started researching, because whenever I get interested in something, and this is where the ADHD comes in, I deep dive into that so far that like I know so much random stuff about so many different things, David, and this is my whole life. So I came across this fantastic, yeah, seriously. I came across, it's the things that stick around over a number of years where you're like, okay, this is a real passion that has stuck. The other ones were passions for a while, not to say they weren't real, but they come and they go, they flare and they're out. So there's this fantastic psychiatrist named Dr. Russell Barkley, and if you can give him a listen, he's unbelievable. He has a great series of videos. It's one lecture, and because he knows who his audience is, it's one lecture split up into tiny bite-sized 5 to 10 minute chunks, so you can watch them in your own time. And he's talking about the theme was, if I could only tell parents 30 things about ADHD for their child, like what would I want them to know? And it's this unbelievable lecture that was incredibly eye-opening, and was where I started understanding more of what this means, that, ADHD, I think the worst thing that ever happened to people with ADHD was them naming it ADHD, attention deficit hyperactive disorder. It's not an attention disorder. It impacts attention, but at its core, it is an executive function disorder. The area of the brain that develops executive function develops differently than people who do not have ADHD, and that impacts a wide range of things in their lives, anything having to do with executive function. Yes.
Okay, we need to define executive function for anyone who's listening. Can you please give me a one sentence? Executive function is the ability to do A, B, C, D, E.
So executive function is not quite the ability to do A, B, C, D, and I'm going to, because I want to give you an accurate, proper, okay. It's a set of skills, right? And they underline the capacity to plan ahead, to meet goals, to display self-control, follow multiple step directions. It's a whole, it's basic cognitive processes of the brain. And these are necessary for cognitive control of behavior. I'm looking at Wikipedia here to give you the most correct, so some of these, so the basics here, and I'm going to give you the list because I always forget a couple. So, control of attention, way up there. That's one of the executive functions. Cognitive inhibition, your ability to, your stop motion of, nope, I'm not going to impulsively do this thing. I'm going to inhibit myself from doing this thing. Garbage, not there. And inhibitory control, working memory. That thing that tells you to go back to doing the thing you were doing before you went off and did another thing. So hey, this is, so you have, trouble regulating your attention. This is where really it impacts kids in school. So, okay, I've been paying attention to the teacher. I'm paying attention. Ooh, this interesting thing just caught my attention. That little voice in your head that says, hey, remember you were listening to the teacher, you should get back to that, doesn't exist. It's not there. I mean, it exists, but in very low levels. So that's working memory. Other things that, basic executive functions include ability to plan, project planning, time management, time blindness is a huge issue. A total, I don't understand time. For me, there is now and there is later. And if it doesn't have to be done now, it can be done later. But later is like an hour before it needs to be done.
It's like whatever.
So this becomes difficult.
It's like at some point in the future.
but there's no concept of time. It's that thing that you're like, oh, I need to be at the doctor in half an hour. I can fit in another 45-minute episode of my favorite show before I need to be there, for sure. Which I've literally done before. I've been like 45 minutes and I need to be there in half an hour. That works.
I know how long it takes to cook dinner. I can cook dinner in 15 minutes. It'll be fine. It's an hour-long recipe.
Yeah. So all of these executive functions are developed in the frontal regions of the brain. And so ADHD is an executive function disorder. All of these different executive functions are impacted by this. Executive function it's quantitative. It's like height, people are taller, people are shorter, Same thing with anybody with ADHD or without ADHD. You all have executive function and the different ones also, not the same, each one to the amount that you have it. Some people have more of one, some people have less of another. People with ADHD are starting at the complete bottom end of the scale on all of those. And then even between people with ADHD, there are differences. Some people have more of one, another. I struggle tremendously with emotional dysregulation, which is an executive function. Your ability to inhibit your own, to control emotions, to control emotional outbursts, how you feel emotionally about something. I can go from 0 to 60 in a second. I'll suddenly be super overwhelmed, and it can be explosive. And it's been hugely healing and helpful to understand that and find the ways to curb that. Shimmy, who is also now diagnosed as an adult, yeah.
I have two questions, and then I wanted to get back to how you're dealing with it. And these are questions about how you're dealing with it. The list of things you said, one of the things I taught at Bar Ilan was, as part of my course, and then also outside of my course to friends or to people who are interested, was like productivity. Like I gave a whole lecture. It was basically a lecture in two parts. One was, about setting goals in life and about monetary goals and things like that. But the other one was a whole bunch of stuff I'd learned while working like on my PhD, things that I learned right at the beginning that were very important. The Eisenhower matrix, how to determine what's important and urgent, what's important and put it in a schedule. And I learned about time boxing. I learned about all these different like tools that you can use in order to sort of remove some of that weight from the brain, because when you're trying to do research and you're trying to write and you're trying to do this and trying to do that, it gave a sense of order to my life. How are you using tools, and what tools are you using? And I'd also like to discuss medication, but I want you to continue in your own flow. But if you could address those things, that'd be great.
Oh, they're coming. Don't worry. You're good.
Okay.
Yes. So it's different with everybody. And everybody has their own, because I'll be talking about my experiences and someone will be like, well, I have trouble with that also. We all have trouble with that. It's possible. Most women over 40, by the way, working memory starts to go. Like it's a very standard thing. Especially if you've had children. Every baby, your working memory just gets chipped away a little bit more. That's it. So when you start out with almost none to begin with, oh Lord. Yeah. So sorry, I lost my flow, and I'm actually currently off Ritalin because it wore off for the morning, and I haven't re-upped yet. So I'm like.
It's okay. I'm going to get you back on flow. You were talking about executive function. I got you. You were talking about executive function, and you started to talk about Shimmy getting diagnosed. You were bringing it into a discussion about how you guys were dealing with it.
Yeah. So everybody struggles with different things. Shimmy's emotional regulation is fine. His time blindness is like the worst I've ever seen. And mine is also bad, but I've started to really work hard to correct for that. So what tools, how do you work through this? I mean, it has to start with an understanding of these are the ways that this impacts my life. These are my areas that I am always going to have a harder time with than the average Joe. And there's a big part for me personally, at least, that was important, which was beginning to heal and to forgive myself for my life, basically, because there's this thing that happens when you have ADHD, and it's undiagnosed, where you grow up and yeah.
That's gotta. I mean, just I don't want to cut you off, but at the same time, that's got to be such a difficult realization, to come to the realization that, hey, there's been this thing wrong with me all my life, and I've been blaming myself, or I've been getting blamed for not being able to do these things, and it is tremendously impactful and hurtful.
Yeah. So I'm gonna just tweak. It's not this thing that was wrong with me. It's just this thing that was different. That wasn't the standard expectation.
100%. I apologize. You are correct. I apologize.
Yeah. No, it's fine. It's fine. I'm just gonna to like, you know, accurate. As a technical writer, I'm a fan of accurate language. But there's this thing that happens when you're undiagnosed with ADHD, and it's a very common experience. I think most people who got diagnosed later in life and have started to understand what this means will I've heard a lot of people talk about the same experience, and it's this expectations and constant failure to meet expectations. It's the, you have so much potential. We see so much potential that you're not fulfilling. It's the, why are you so lazy? Why can't you just do this? And there's this backwards understanding of, I'm not lazy. I severely struggle with getting started on projects unless someone helps me just a little bit, unless someone gives me an in. A project to me feels like an enormous jumble of tasks that I can't even begin to pick apart. I need to start much smaller than that. And so when I just can't, oh, you're being lazy, or you have so much potential, you're not fulfilling, somehow this is my fault. I am failing to meet expectations that aren't reasonable because the world is not presenting those expectations in a way that are accessible to me. And so this backwards kind of looking back and being, I spend my whole life constantly being like, why is this so easy for everybody else? Why can't you just do this thing, Miriam? Why can't you just do what you're supposed to do? This constant yelling at myself my whole life. And it was a hugely healing experience to start to look backwards and be like, you were doing the best you could with the tools you were given, which were not many. You were not given many tools at all. And all things considered, I did really, really well. And that was very healing on its own. So that's one thing. And then once I started understanding again, specifically where those points of difficulty were, that was where I started being able to, you know, remembering appointments, something really basic, really simple. Okay. I was forever constantly missing kids, dentist appointments, kids, oh my God, my brain, doctor's appointments, anything that was scheduled for this or for that. Or it was a constant, like, any meetings, all meetings, anything. I was constantly forgetting about them. And I was always in a state of panic. People are like, well, just write them down in a scheduler. I'm like, I'm not going to open a book every day to check. Like, that's not even in my brain to do. That's not. And now I recognize I need an external hard drive for everything. Understanding how my brain works. It's not just everything goes into my Google Planner, and I have alarms set a day before, half an hour before, and 10 minutes before, because yes, half an hour before I get the alarm, but then something distracts me and then I forget about it. I do need a 10-minute before alarm to remind me once again that I need to do this thing. I have timers for things. If I'm in the middle of something and I suddenly remember something else I need to do, I used to be like, okay, I'll remember to do it later. No, I won't. I can't expect myself to. That's not fair to me. My brain is literally not built to remember this later when I need to remember it. So I will pull my phone out and I will set an alarm for a time when I know I will be available to do this thing. And without fail, it goes off and I'm like, oh, right. I totally forgot about this thing. Good. I set an alarm. But I know to do that now because I don't have the unreasonable expectation on myself that my brain's supposed to work the way everybody else's works. It doesn't. So that's like one system that's been really hugely helpful for me.
it seems to me like what you're talking about right now is almost like a dynamic form of time boxing. Time boxing is like you start your day and you know how your day is set up. You have things set in schedules. I use alarms also just to remind me, hey, in about 15 minutes, you're supposed to transition from this thing to that next thing. That's how I use time boxing alarms. But there's also spaces in my box in my schedule which are empty, and you're saying it's a very dynamic thing. Instead of just having knowing at the beginning of the day, here's what I'm going to do, you're using time boxing as a mechanism to actually put something into your schedule. When you go, I need to remember to do this, I'm going to actually schedule an appointment with myself for later to do this thing so that I don't get distracted from what I'm doing now. Is that an accurate description of what you just said?
That is absolutely correct. I don't need it for work, because for work I have to. I have to. I don't function otherwise. I do not function as a human being otherwise. And everything gets dropped. As it is, things get dropped like that. Things get dropped because sometimes I forget to put something in my phone. I still sometimes fall back on the old standard, and I don't start my day knowing what I have to do a lot of the time. I have a lot of trouble visualizing the future and looking ahead. That's something that I struggle with a lot. And so I rely a lot on past me to have set me up for success. And there's a certain level of trust involved there that I really have to, like my daughter broke her arm a few months ago, and she's had regular checkups with the orthopedist. And when we go to the orthopedist at the hospital, we have to get a special form from our healthcare provider in advance to make sure that they're covering it before we go. And so I don't only have an alarm set for when her appointment is, I have an alarm set a week and a half before that to sit down and send in the paperwork to get that form ready. And if I don't remember to do that, the moment it's on my plate, the moment I leave her appointment that I just had, I have to do that right away or I will forget. So the moment I walk out of her appointment, I'm already putting in the next one and the date that I have to get that form in advance. And I have to be able to rely on past me that I set up that system for myself in the future, because otherwise everything falls apart. So that's like one thing, for example. With work, I have my Google Calendar. We work with, and I have all of my meetings are set up and everything's set up, and anything that's regular, sync meetings that are regular, the ones I have every week, like those I know, they're in my head. Those are standard part of my everyday life. That's very hard to forget. But it's those one-time things that come up that fall apart. And so I can go into a day and I have no idea what I need to do that day. I kind of like get my kids out, and that's my only focus in the morning is just get them out to school. And then I kind of stand in my dining room while my brain tries to catch up, with the rest of me, and kind of look around and go, okay. And there are days where I can't. There are days where executive function differs from day to day as well with anybody. If you don't get enough sleep, if you've just finished a really enormous project and you're on that downward, after post project, anytime something very big emotionally has happened, I can generally expect the next day to 2 days, I'm not going to function. I'm really going to struggle. I call those days 14-step coffee days. Those are the days where I don't get into my kitchen and I just have to make myself coffee. I can't make myself coffee unless I break it down, because it's too big a task. I need to fill the urn. I need to set it to boil. I need to take out my mug. I need to get down the coffee. I need to take out a spoon. I cannot even approach the concept of making a cup of coffee on days like those unless I break it down into the tiniest, most simplest of tasks. My brain cannot handle it. And so I have days like those as well. And those are days where I just have to kind of look at myself and look at my life and say, today nothing's going to get done. And that's okay, because tomorrow you'll be super functional and you'll make up for lost time. And that's like that's another tool I use, is just self-understanding and forgiveness, and allowing myself to stop when I need to stop, when I can't push myself further. My brain has limitations. It's a superpower. Like, listen, when I need to get something done and I have a deadline coming up, I don't think I've ever seen anybody work as efficiently or as quickly or as lightning fast as my brain goes. Like, it is unbelievable. to me, and I've lived with this brain since I was born. Like, it is amazing. But the counterpart of that is the crashing and the burning. So, yeah.
All right. You mentioned something which I think is really interesting, and I want to talk about it for a moment. It's actually something that neuroscience actually talks about as a concept. It's the idea that when you get to the end of a project, there's this lull afterwards, and a lot of people will try and do something to keep up the dopamine and keep up the neurotransmitters that will like keep up that feeling and do something else to do that feeling. But you're saying is something very correct, which is accept that you're going through this downward sweep and you will get back up to a point of neural balance, and then you can challenge yourself with that next big challenge. But if you try and continue fighting for that neural hit of more dopamine and more what's it called? This starts with an O and I don't even remember right now. It's just not going to work, and your body won't function as well. So that's a very interesting. I mean, it's a huge tip, I think, for anybody, especially someone who has ADHD, because when you are dealing with that, I need to keep pushing environment to be able to say, wait a second, I've had success, I can V this, and now I need to allow my body to rebalance itself. I think that's really, really important. But there's like a second side to that, which is while you're doing that, that's normally the time that people would sort of think about what they're going to be doing next and planning it out, and sort of without it being stressed, because they know that they need this period of recoup. And you're saying, I cannot do that. So at what point?
No, it's split up into two parts. It's what you're saying. It's split up. With me, it's not on the downwards. I have to give myself the time to not head empty, nothing. Like, I can't. Like, I get to the point, depending on how intense a period has been, I literally get to the point where I can't make coffee. Like, this is where I'm at. Maybe the next day I can start thinking about what the next step is or what I'm doing after that. And yes, it is an important part, but I can't do both because having to plan ahead is planning is an executive function. And I have them. I have executive functions, but in very minute amounts, and I have to use those resources very sparingly. And I can't push myself. And before I understood this, and I always had the dip, I always had the crash afterwards, but I get terrible anxiety because I'd be sitting there not doing anything, and I'd be like, but I have to be doing something. Like, what's wrong with me? Why can't I? What's wrong with me? And I get terrible anxiety attacks as a result. And this has been take your time.
I want to talk about, just for a moment, there's a tool that I use, which I have not been diagnosed with ADHD, but I have, as we both know, severe chronic pain, which is no fun. And it's something which it makes my life very difficult in terms of the amount of energy I can bring to any number of different things. And I'm going to talk D&D for a minute here, because
it probably deeply impacts your executive function as well. The pain.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I'm pretty good with decision making and planning and things like that. My problem is more like, now that I've got the plan, my body goes, yeah, you've planned really well, but you don't have the capacity to actually do that plan. Because my body goes, you're in too much pain. You've done a great job. You have objectives. You've got goals. You've time blinded it. You've time boxed it. You know exactly what you have to do. You know everything. Great planning. Great executive function. Now go do it. And my body goes, no. And I end up like sitting on a recliner going, why is my body not working? I need to go make dinner. Or whatever. But one of the things that I have used as a tool for myself to sort of explain this, and also to give myself a sense of where I'm at in terms of my energy level, my ability to get things done, is actually a D&D function. I use HP and exhaustion points as a way to describe the amount of pain that I'm dealing with, or the amount of energy drain that I've had, and then I use exhaustion.
Spoon theory, but using yes.
And then I use exhaustion points as a way to describe how I'm rolling right now, right? So I wake up in the morning, and let's say someone has 120
I use spell slots.
Okay, so it's a similar idea. So the way I use it is as follows. I say I have 100, let's say I wake up with 120, a normal person who doesn't have pain wakes up with 120 hit points and no exhaustion points after a long rest, after they've slept 6 to 8 hours.
What level are you at?
Oh, I'm like, come on, I'm a PhD. I'm 45 years old. I have 3 children. You're like 150. You got like 150 hit points. What are you talking about? Come on. You got 5 kids. That's like automatic.
I have like 60. I have like 60 hit points, David. I have like 60.
Okay, so I use 120. Like normally, I agree with. Normally, I would use 60, but I like 120 because it lets me break down. Like instead of having to say I lost a half of a hit point, like getting gently rubbed, like gently tapped by someone, and it's not a full hit point because it wasn't that bad, but it was bad enough that it like took off a little bit of like it was like that. Okay, but like I use 120, so like each hit point is the equivalent of a half of a hit point. Let's call it like that. Anyway, the way I play it is as follows: every 20 hit points, I'm going to get an exhaustion point. There's just no way around it. If I'm walking around and I've already lost 20 hit points, I'm already rolling badly in some way, shape, or form. And exhaustion points have different kind of roles to them, right? Your exhaustion points, your first thing you get is that your reaction rolls are going to be bad, and then your action rolls are going to be bad, and then your this is going to be bad, and then all of a sudden you're in half movement, and then all of a sudden you're stuck in bed, and then all of a sudden you're dead.
This is the best analogy. Listen, it's so good. Oh.
I know. So I use this as a way to describe where I'm at right now, both in terms of how much pain am I dealing with, how much energy and pain has been taken away from me through pain, through dealing with taps and touches and moving around and bumping on my legs and trying to make tensies for my kids and trying to get through my day, and teaching is a huge energy drain for me because I hold in the pain, right? And then afterwards I have this moment of like, okay, so now I can let it go, but I fall apart afterwards because like all of a sudden I've lost. It's like I've been holding these hit points, and then all of a sudden it's like you've lost 30 hit points in one shot. Here you go. And all of a sudden I go from I'm not rolling so well because I've been holding it in to, oh my god, I can't even move. I'm in half movement. Don't expect me to go fast right now. So I use this as an analogy for myself, but I guess what I'm curious about, and I think you're trying to answer it anyway, but I'm going to ask the question, is this analogy similar to what it is you experience in terms of executive function? Where like you have a certain number of hit points in your executive function basket, and then as you go through using those hit points, you like go through and like suddenly you can't work as well, and you're rolling worse and worse and worse to the point where half movement, you're kind of stuck, and then you need to rest. And what's horrible about exhaustion points is a full rest won't necessarily give you a full, all your exhaustion points are back. It might give you an exhaustion point back. It might give you 2 exhaustion points back, but it's not giving you everything, right? It takes a few full rests to get back to the point where all of your exhaustion points are back, and you have to really rest.
So, yes, absolutely. I don't think it's the same one-to-one. Yours is, I think for you, it's a very physical, immediate trigger. And I think with my brain, it's a little bit different. I think that looking at it on a larger scale, over the course of time, instead of in a single day, yes, it 100% applies. And then sometimes in a specific day, I never know, like something might pop up that hits me really hard. That could be something very emotional that I suddenly find out, or that could be discovering last minute that I forgot to do a thing and having to scramble to go do it really, really quickly. That could be forgetting to take meds at a certain point when I knew I was really going to need them for whatever reason. It could be a whole bunch of different things. And in those cases, yes, for sure. This is not something that necessarily happens every single day, but it can. Like the option is there. So if I suddenly realize I totally forgot to do something and I have to break concentration on what I was deeply focused on and run and do that in a scramble and stressed out about it, when I get back, I will be less functional for the rest of the day. Absolutely. Like that's just hit, and that's it moving forward. But like you were talking about teaching, for example, and how you push through it for that moment, and you get all of the, you collect everything you got, and you work with that. I've had times like that also. I'll have a bad brain day, and I'll have to run a team meeting for whatever reason, and I'll get into the team meeting. And I'm obviously, me, already known as like the biggest extrovert in our entire team. And so like I'll run a team meeting, and I'll be all over the place, and I'll be super energetic, and I'll be, interesting, and waving my hands around. And afterwards, my friend will message me and be like, I can't run team meetings because everyone's going to expect me to do what you're doing. And I'm like, no one expects anybody else on the team to do what I do. I think we all know me well enough at this point that like, whatever. But then I'll finish the meeting and that's it. Yeah. And that's it. I like pulled the last amount of reserves I had to maintain that. And then I'm dead for the rest of the night, and my like everything takes a hit. The household takes a hit. My kids take a hit from it. I think what saves me and us all is we're super open about it. We talk about it. They all suffer from the same issues, We are a family of people with ADHD who deeply understand what that means, which actually makes us a very highly functional family with ADHD, because there's a lot more understanding and making space for that. But, like I said,
It also means you're very accepting of each other.
yes, absolutely.
Super accepting. Like, super accepting of each other. And that gives you guys the room to care and acknowledge each other and be able to say, I know where you're at. It's okay. I've got this right now. I'm at a point where I can deal, and I see that you can't. And we can, like, it allows you to better cover for each other because you have that mutual acceptance.
So Shimmy and I do that for sure. But even more than that, my kids know how to express that. I've taught my children how to express that. Adir, my middle son, he has a lot of trouble with emotional dysregulation sometimes. And he can recognize when that's happening. He's 11. And he can come to me and say, I'm having a really rough time right now. I need some time alone in my room, and I need no one to talk to me right now. And he'll be on the verge of like getting angry and screaming, and you could see he's holding himself like this, but he's not doing it. He's expressing himself, and then he goes and he shuts himself away for a little bit until he's feeling up to facing the world, which to me is an unbelievable thing for an 11-year-old to be able to do. We're talking about emotional dysregulation.
That's a huge level of maturity.
Huge. We're talking about emotional dysregulation. A lot of my kids have difficulty with that. I definitely have difficulty with that. But another thing is physical. How do you say visut chushi in English?
Tactile regulation.
That tactile regulation. By the way, major thing with people with ADHD as well. I've always suffered tremendously from that. If I'm anxious, if I'm having a rough time, no one can touch me. And there's this amazing thing that my kids know to ask. If they see I'm having a rough time and they want to comfort me with a hug, because that's what they want to do, they'll still be like, hey, Ima, can I give you a hug right now? Are you okay with it? Asa'el, my 16-year-old. And I'll be like, you know what? Actually, I can't handle a hug right now. And no one gets offended. He'll be like, okay, that's fine. And later on, when everything's okay again, he'll ask me again. And yeah, that'll be fine. And I think that acknowledgement and respect and understanding of where each of us struggle. My other kids need hugs. They need that. They need the tactile, touch. I'm like, nope. Someone touches me right now, they die. And having that understanding, and also understanding of personal space and consent and agency and all of those things, I think is really, really important and amazing. And the only reason that we've really been able to implement this and understand this is because we did a deep dive into, hey, what does this actually mean for us? How does this change our approach to the world? How does this affect our brains, and where does it affect our brains? And, it's hard for me because I see my oldest son still repeating those same sentences I would say to myself of, I should be able to do this, or why am I being lazy? And I work really hard to counter that for him. I think it's a natural thing to feel. I think it's hard to escape it when you see everybody around you succeeding at something that you're struggling with. So I'm working really hard with him on that. I'm being like, listen, It's okay for this to be harder for you. I'm not saying give up and say, oh, I can't do this because ABC. Like you're not going to get anywhere in life that way. We could sit around feeling sorry for ourselves that we struggle more with this sort of thing than other people do. Or we could just be like, okay, it's okay that I struggle more with this. It's a given. I have to be more forgiving towards myself for struggling with this. And let's try to implement the systems that'll make it a little bit easier with the full understanding that I still might not be able to get to the point, the ease that other people approach this with.
Okay, so you mentioned medication a couple of times. I'd like to talk about that for a minute. And I'd also like to understand how your medication and all the stuff that you've learned has impacted your work. And then we'll continue after that. So just a few more questions.
Right. So meds. The amount of time I've heard a parent say, or someone who was on Ritalin as a child say to me, oh yeah, but I won't do that to my kid because I don't want them to be a zombie and I don't want them to be disconnected and I think it's terrible for children. And I get really frustrated because no one should ever feel that way on Ritalin. And I know there are some cases that are outside of the norm that like, yeah, really this doesn't work for them well and nothing and whatever, fine, it happens. But overall, there was so little understanding when we were growing up about what this means and how the medication affects you and the signs to look for and what the side effects mean. So a lot of people were just pushing the Ritalin and, you know, their kids, if their kids became more muted and which most of the time is what happened. And I'll explain why. It breaks my heart because that's a very, very basic sign that you are either on the wrong medication or you are taking the wrong dose. And I think we are still seeing it today because doctors start everybody on the lowest dose possible when you're trying to find the right med for yourself. And they do that without explaining very often to parents what to look for or what they should be experiencing, what the result should be on a good medication. And when you take a dose that's too low, that results in zombification, in that feeling of fog, in that disconnection, in that mutedness, that robotic kind of feeling. That's a low dose problem. A high dose problem is you feel like super jittery and you're having a lot of trouble keeping your emotions in check, feeling a lot of anger, feeling a lot of, difficulty. These are two really classic symptoms of either a dose that's too high or a dose that's too low. And that says, hey, tweak the dose. Your kid is feeling like that. They need more Ritalin than you're currently giving them on their basic dose. Try it, see what happens. If it still doesn't work, it's possible the medication isn't the right one. There are so many different structures for Ritalin. You've got the basic stuff, which lasts 3 to 4 hours. You've got the lasting effect Ritalin LA that goes 6 to 8 hours. You have Concerta that goes 10 to 12 hours. Then you have Adderall, all the derivatives of Adderall as well that break down differently. And it really comes down to your own personal brain and how your brain breaks down these medications. Each one of us is on something else in the house based on what worked for them. I'm on the basic stuff, 3 to 4 hours. Why? Because the LA, no matter what dose I took, I always felt jittery, even on the lowest one. I couldn't get past the jitteriness. Doesn't work for me. Fine. The Concerta worked great, but when I came off of it at the end of the day, I felt like a rag that had been run through the ringer several times. So no, but 2 of my sons are on Concerta, different doses. Shimmy's on LA. It's trial and error until you find the thing that's going to work for you. And you should feel like the best version of yourself on this medication. You should feel good on this medication. If you don't feel good on this medication, something's wrong. The med is wrong. And there are people sometimes where they try everything and nothing really works for them. It's rare, but it happens. And then you have cases where as you grow up and kids, especially, hormones change, things change, that the med doesn't work as well anymore. And then you have to start trying again and figuring out what's going to work for you. And so I have like such a bee in my bonnet about, and it's not anyone's fault. It's a lack of education on the subject. It's a lack of explanation. And I think even understanding. A lot of people in this country go to neurologists for ADHD diagnoses, and it's not a neurologist it's not in a neurologist's purview, honestly. It's a psychiatric. It's a psychiatrist's wheelhouse to deal with this. But there's like this stigma around going to see a psychiatrist. No, I'm not taking my kid to see a psychiatrist. And so you end up with this situation where I don't really think neurologists have the understanding, or they're not explaining it. Most people I talk to, unless they've done research on their own, no doctor has sat them down and explained and said, hey, this is how this works. These are the results you should be looking for. These are the warning signs to look out for. And if this or this happens, come back to me and we'll tweak it and we'll play around with it. I have seen that with psychiatrists. I have not seen that with most people. And I get very, very frustrated about it because I think that Ritalin is a fantastic tool if you know how to use it and if you need it. A lot of people were on it and felt good on it and then chose to go off of it, and that's fine. But like, there's a huge use for it that is incredibly helpful.
So from there, I'm going to take you to how do you use it and what is it? How does it impact things like your work? And in what way when do you say this is a necessity and when do you say this is something that I don't need right now? I can get through this without it.
Right. So for me, I don't only take Ritalin for work. I find it helps me in my personal life tremendously. Also, it's been a huge game changer for me. How my work changed when I got diagnosed is a combo of meds and understanding of where my struggles were. Because I started approaching my workloads differently. I started approaching my own organization differently. I started being stricter with myself. I hate micromanagement. I hate processes. Like, I find that they clutter things up a lot, but I cannot lie that I need some processes because that's what keeps me on task and that's what helps me stay organized and stay on top of my own work. So that understanding and kind of changing how I approached my own work and being stricter with myself about getting things done earlier instead of pushing things off to deadlines, etc. That's been a huge change in the last several years for me. And it helps me down the line. It's harder for me. My brain has to work harder to force myself to get things done earlier. But because I've recognized that is one of my struggles and one of my difficulties, I can force myself to and when I'm on Ritalin, it's far easier to do it. Ritalin, you were talking earlier about dopamine and neurotransmitters in the brain. This is how Ritalin works. People with ADHD have about 80% more neurotransmitters in their brain that recycle dopamine than the average Joe. What does this mean? Your brain still produces the same amount of dopamine, but it doesn't stay there. It stays there for like a second and then your brain's like, whoop, bye, like that's it, So staying on task and getting yourself motivated to do things is really, really difficult. And really what Ritalin does is it blocks up those neuroreceptors for a few hours. It says, hey, any dopamine you produce for the next couple hours, it's staying there. Don't worry about it. And so when I'm on Ritalin, I 45 minutes after taking it, I get that ping of just the world suddenly gets like really calm. It's really loud in here all the time, David. Like it's really loud in here. And suddenly there's just this moment of just like, like it is a sigh of relief. Like I don't realize how tense I'm holding myself and how much I'm like trying to shield from the constant input of everything until that kicks in and I'm like, oh, hey, what's up? Like, it's great. And then I can sit down and I can get tasks done. And honestly, once I get myself going, if I'm mid-project and I'm in the middle of work, I don't need to take Ritalin again. Because my struggle, and anyone with ADHD, the main struggle is getting started. Once you're working, not a big deal. Then you have to finish the job, take the Ritalin again. That's where you get to like the 85% point and you're like, oh, well, I guess I'm done with this. I'm just about done with it. So I'm never going to finish it ever because I'm just about done with it. So that's that. On a personal level, I struggle with getting up in the morning. I have to spatula myself out of bed and I have to get up with kids. I have to get them out the door. And as I said before, I struggle a lot with emotional dysregulation. And this was life-changing and eye-opening for me to discover this because I yelled at my kids a lot. and I'd get really angry. I would suddenly get super overwhelmed, and I'd snap in a moment. And a second later, I'd be like, "Wow, man, that was a lot. Like that was uncalled for." But in the moment, the inhibition, that stop motion, the lack of, the impulsivity comes out, and it's like, and I had so much guilt. Like I hated that about myself, and it was something that I was really, really struggling with, and I was trying very hard to work on. And again, that feeling of I just kept failing, understanding this issue about myself and what was causing it and where it was coming from. First of all, I've developed a huge situational awareness at any given moment of what's going on around me. If the house is getting too chaotic, if the house is getting too crazy, a warning light goes on in my brain already, so that I don't give myself room for impulsive response. I'm already paying attention to how much this is affecting my brain and how much I need to keep an eye out. But I will say that when I started taking Ritalin, I was taking it, I can take it up to 3 times a day because I take the short stuff. Now I'm taking it more often than not, just twice a day, but there are days where I'm really having a hard time where I'll take it a 3rd time. And I found that even off Ritalin at the end of the day, because I hadn't spent all day fighting with my brain and fighting with myself, I was like a live wire every night. I was so hypersensitive. I was so extremely on edge already by the time I got home from work that like it was a lost cause. And I found that even just reducing that stress on my brain for most of the day, within 2 weeks of starting to take Ritalin, like I don't yell. I never yell at my kids. I haven't yelled at my kid. Like, look, there are extreme situations like where I don't know, whatever. We all yell at our kids once in a while. It happens. I don't yell at my kids. I don't shout at my kids. I haven't in years. And I've had stress, like crazy stress, but I learned a process in my brain and I learned where it was coming from. And I take Ritalin on a regular basis. So I set myself up for success, basically, by making sure that the strain on my emotional dysregulation part of my executive function is reduced tremendously. And I know on those days where I'm having a hard time or I'm really exhausted, I will take it 3 times a day just to make sure that I can stay balanced at home and keep things balanced for my kids and make sure that, that I'm
okay.
Yeah.
So it seems like you have created an environment in your house and through your medication and through your education and personal education and making sure your kids are aware, and your kids who have ADHD, they also need to know about this. I'm wondering, how is that translated in work? Like, your workers don't know about ADHD. I mean, I'm sure you've educated them. Don't get me wrong. I am sure that
Yes,
you've
I
educated
have.
them. But
They work with me, David. They know everything there is to know.
but I'm curious how the environment, like neurodivergent people who have ADHD or autism or other issues, not issues, other brain differences, not every work environment is really open and loving and caring and warm and able to deal with that. How is that sort of like, yes, I'm sure your team knows, but how are you experiencing that out there? Like what needs to change in your mind to make the workforce more neurodivergent friendly?
So I'm really lucky because I work at Red Hat, and Red Hat is like the pinnacle of, the best culture you would want to work at. Like they have a whole community. They have a neurodiverse community, like the neurodivergence community of Red Hat that has regular events and meetings. Like it's something that is very openly discussed at Red Hat, and they make space for it, and there's a lot of understanding there, which is fascinating to me because it's not something I ever expected to find. At other places I've worked, I mean, to be fair, I was also really starting that journey of discovery, and then COVID hit and I was at home most of the time. So it was less impactful on, what was, I don't think they saw the difference as much, but I mean, before I was diagnosed, I was always that person who kept bursting into the middle of conversations and who kept going off on a tangent and who people would be like, okay, but Miriam, one second. And, that feeling that kind of carries with you when you're like me of, oh my God, I'm always too much and I'm always talking too much. And that was, previously coupled with a lack of understanding of part of why that is. Part of it is just I am very energetic, and this might be part of the ADHD also, whatever, but fine. Sorry. Oh my God. Yeah. But it's not something I've seen widely talked about at a lot of companies. It's not something I've seen that's I think a lot of companies are becoming more aware of needing to make space for neurodiversity and have an understanding of it. But what that means is really different based on where you are. And I don't think most places are there. I think that I lucked out with Red Hat. I think that this is a company that even if someone doesn't have a deep understanding of what this means, is open to hearing about it and open to becoming understanding. It's part of the culture, and yeah, like it's something that's discussed. I mean, currently, I think this whole discussion between you and me popped up because I came to you for help about some of the key results objectives we're trying to achieve at Red Hat on like an organizational level moving forward, and there's been a lot of talk of making people feel welcome, making space for people, and one of the big shifts I want to do is promote a difference in how we write our emails, because I don't read company emails. I get these company emails with like 4 blocks of text in them and a ton of marketing speech, and I'm like, huh? And I can't extract information from that. I don't know what's happening half the time. People are like, oh, did you read that email about this and this that's going on? And I'm like, yeah, I tried. Nope. So I feel like I'm in the dark half the time. Yeah. The key result I wanted to present didn't actually get picked up in the end, but there are other key results that are getting worked on that are about neurodiversity. They are trying to, make sure that job descriptions for applicants, et cetera, and at the company are written so that they're clearer for people for neurodiversity, et cetera, and like there are moves in the right direction. I've been very frustrated through no fault of any specific person with part of coming up across this, because as someone who's neurodiverse, as someone who struggles with exactly the issue I'm trying to change, I've also been finding that, to get involved in these projects it's like anathema to how my brain works. Like it's they start off super conceptual and vague and without, I'm a person of action. I'm a person who needs really clear direction, and then point me in the right direction. I'm off. I will get things done. But it's actually been like weirdly, it's been ironic, because it's like, okay, well, if you want to get involved to make change, you have to get involved, but you have to get involved in a way that your brain can't conceptualize at all. So, but the amazing thing is that I've actually been super open about that with my manager, with the people who have been in charge of these initiatives. I've been like, listen, I am telling you as a person who is neurodiverse that the projects themselves are not accessible. And everyone has been opening to listen. Like they've all been open to listen about to that, to try to make change and to be there and to explain it to me. Like even no one's perfect. They want to make things better, but it's not, oh, we want to make things better and we're just going to say we want to make things better. It's we want to make things better. And if you come and you tell us that the way we're trying to do it isn't working, we want to hear that from you. So that's been very gratifying.
Okay. So I just want to translate what you just said so that I make sure I understood it. You're saying that part of the issue that you have as someone who has ADHD is that you're great at the tactical level. You're great at the maneuvers and the skills and even the techno-tactical. Like, I can get these tasks done and I can hit these goals, no problem, because I can do that. But the moment you start talking to me about objectives and key results, or even bigger, vision, and like how the key objectives sort of flow into vision and how they work together, that's already something which is like way outside of your cognitive capability because of the neurodivergent functions that
structure
that ADHD presents.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. Okay. So that actually, I mean, that says a lot about how someone in ADHD might be able to go up in management or in leadership, because there's a functional point in management and leadership where your job is to discuss objectives and key results and be able to define those for people. And there's a point where you move from management into real leadership, where, like, we're not even going to get to the difference between those two, but functionally your job is now to discuss things like strategic vision for your department and the ability to say, I'm defining what vision looks like. And at the same time, what I find so very, very interesting about you, Miriam, is that if you don't have to do that for like a business, but if you had to do that for like a book or a story that you had to tell, you do that so very well.
But there's a point. There's a point. I'm not just, I think my main issue is I reach a point with vision where I can conceptualize vision for management. But when you couch it in, there's this thing, and you're in academia. Let's talk about academia, okay? There's this gatekeeping element to academia where you could either just say a thing or you could sound academic while you're saying the thing in a way that no one's going to understand. You're saying the same thing, but why not strip it down and just say what you mean? And this is where I run into problems with marketing speak and concepts that I get the vagueness. I understand where it's coming from, but when I have to dig through it to find the single idea at the core, that's where I struggle. And that's where a lot of people are going to struggle, not just neurodivergent people. That's where a lot of this is going to go over our heads. And I've always had an issue with, and maybe this is why I'm a technical writer. We're bringing it back, David. We're bringing it back. This is
okay.
One of weirdly the things that I ended up super passionate about what I do, which whoever thought I would enjoy being a technical writer, but I do. And it is that at the core of my job, it is to use language to get an idea across as clearly and as simply as I can, to make sure someone on the other end of this who's having trouble getting something done will be able to get it done and get the help that they need to get it done. They'll be able to look at that and say, oh wow, this was exactly what I needed to know. My job, the thing I love about being a technical writer, and when you really reduce it down to the bare essence of it, is that I get to help someone who might be having a hard time with figuring something out. That's what I love to do. And I want to help them as easily as I can. As someone who didn't always get that help, as someone who still doesn't always get that help, who still has to wade through things, even with my extensive understanding and knowledge of the language, and that's my forte. It's where I live, and I still struggle with it. I want to make sure no one else has to do that. I want to help you know what you need to do. I want to help you understand what's going on. And I think that's really what I love about being a technical writer, first and foremost.
I think that's really cool. I have one other question about technical writing, and then I'm going to ask my final question of the day. My one other question about technical writing is, I understand that there's levels of technical writing, like you have a junior and you senior, because you're, senior technical writer. Is that sort of a way to move up in the system without needing to understand and engage in this thing of management and leadership with, goals and objectives and vision and all those things which are so difficult? Is that sort of another ranking system that allows you to get more responsibility and a little bit more authority, and people will check in with you about certain things, or you might even be brought into a conversation because of your rank as a technical writer? Did that make sense?
Yes, it did. So again, I think it differs based on company. Most everywhere, everyone, when you're looking at technical writing in this country, at least in most places, you have junior, you have standard, you have senior, you have principal. What that means based on where you work differs. Generally, it comes down to level of experience, level of understanding of your topic, how much you are an owner of what you write, how involved you get. Are you just sitting down and writing the tasks out as you get them and, trying to figure things out and doing the, basic as a junior would? Or are you really involved deeply in a team, getting involved at the core level, having these discussions with subject matter experts and sometimes finding bugs or issues because you're so involved in it. It's your network of how involved you are, I think. I will say that to move up, at least where I'm at, to principal writer does require a certain involvement in more higher concept. You want to get involved on a higher organizational level. You want to get to know more people outside of your area of your product or your project that you're working on, and it's part of what I'm struggling with right now exactly is because I think this is the first time I've kind of run up against that wall of, hey, if I really want to move forward and advance, I have to start dipping my toes into something that is a little bit beyond me, and feels inaccessible in a way that nothing has before. And I think right now what I'm trying to do is figure out how I maneuver those waters to get there. But as a senior writer, what that really means is that I know a lot of shit. I know a lot. I've done a lot of different things. I've worked on a lot of things. I will step into a situation and I'll look at a piece of documentation and I'm not going to hesitate. I'm going to look at it and I'm going to say, no, like this, I'll step in and I'll be like, I know what I'm talking about. This is where this needs to be fixed. These are the areas that it's weak. This is what we can do to help fix it. Who am I speaking to? Finding the people, getting in touch with them, owning all of that.
This is crap and you need to step up. Right.
No. No.
Wait, you're not Israeli? Hold on. Okay.
I am, but I work mainly with non-Israelis right now, so I can't just come in and Israeli all over the place, okay?
Okay, fine. Fair enough. I have a question that goes with this. Do you find yourself mentoring?
I did actually. I onboarded somebody for the first time ever, which was terrifying, but also something I really wanted to do. And onboarding at Red Hat is fascinating. It's a great system. I mean, there are tweaks that can be made, but they're so invested in you, like really getting to learn. For the first 3 months you're at the company, it's like, listen, you might get a couple tasks here, but really what we want you to do these first 3 months is learn. And so I got to do that with someone. I got to be their onboarding buddy.
Okay, but onboarding and mentoring are not the same thing.
No, but they're very similar at Red Hat because it's not just onboarding. It is sitting down, and it depends on who you're on. It depends on who you're working with, really. But there are elements that are very like mentor related. And then there are elements that are more technical, but a lot of it is very like mentory. Is that a word? I don't know. I'm an English major, and I'm not like officially mentoring anybody. I think I do this thing where I'm really super honest about everything, and I'm not really embarrassed about a lot of things. And so I think that I don't directly mentor people, but the amount of times I've gotten messages from teammates after a meeting, after something going on where I brought up a question or I responded to something a certain way, or I was really open about something, and people will come and be like, hey, I just really wanted to say thank you for, asking that question. I didn't know and I was too scared to ask, or, or running things the way that you run things, or talking about things as openly as you do. And this has happened a few times. I think that I don't directly mentor people. I kind of like to just go out there and, I don't know. I think everything comes down to I want to try to make the world a better place. Just through kindness and openness. And so that's kind of how I live. Yeah. So it's not direct mentoring. It's kind of more, and people will come to me and ask me questions, and people will come to me and be like, hey, listen, I wanted to talk to you about something and see what you think, because I think I put out this persona of, I am not going to be judgmental, and I'm going to listen to you and just let you tell me what you want to tell me. And I'll give you my advice or my personal opinion. but that's not, any sort of pressure or anything like that. And I'm like always happy to listen and help someone if they need it. So that's kind of that's like where I live.
Cool. Okay, so last question, and then don't hang up on me because I have something to talk about afterwards. My last question goes as follows. We've spoken about a lot. We've spoken about technical writing. We've spoken about ADHD. We've spoken about Dungeons and Dragons. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you would have really liked for us to have a discussion about? And if so, what? Or is there a question that I should have asked that I didn't and you could answer?
That's a super dangerous question, because anything I say is going to result in another 15-minute discussion. I have a huge range of interests and things that are fun. We touched on some of them. I think that we've known each other for 18 years, going on 20. And I think that we still learn things about each other. And I think that every time we get together, it's always interesting and it's always fun to talk and learn and hear what we have to say. So like, I think that there's a whole lot. There's a whole lot. But I think that what we wanted to discuss, which was technical writing and neurodiversity in general, I think we mostly covered it. Mostly, like I could go on forever, but I'm not going to.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, so I'm going to say thank you very much, Miriam, for giving me this time, more than we actually originally planned. I do very much appreciate it. I have learned a lot about ADHD. I
know, I was like watching the clock click. Yeah.
I've learned a lot about ADHD and about neurodiversity from you today. I've also learned quite a bit about technical writing that I didn't know. And I hope that these are things that will help other people who are interested in technical writing or are dealing with their own struggles with executive function and things like that. So thank you so much for coming and sharing with me. Thank you for joining us in the Doctor's Den. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Hope to see you next time.